Good evening. I'm Liz Bradner, co-president with Wynn Kane of the League of Women Voters of Lake Forest, Lake Bluff area. Thank you all for coming for this very difficult topic. And thank you to the Church of the Holy Spirit for hosting us. Thank you to Jean Brown and Carol Gale, our program chairman, for planning the event. And thank you to Joy Guscott-Mueller for moderating it. The program tonight will deal with the increasing threat from guns. The National League's position with regard to this issue is that the proliferation of handguns and semi-automatic assault weapons in the United States is a major health and safety threat to its citizens, and it supports federal measures to limit the accessibility and regulate the ownership of such weapons. To this end, it supports the reasonable regulation of handguns and assault weapons based on public health and safety concerns. Reasonable regulation includes licensing procedures for gun ownership by private citizens to include a waiting period for background checks, personal identity verifications, gun safety education and annual license renewal, and enforcement of strict penalties for the improper possession of and crimes committed with handguns and assault weapons. The League is a nonpartisan political organization which encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. Men as well as women are encouraged to join. Please consider joining us and take membership information from the registration table outside. The League is neutral on candidates and political parties. It is not neutral on issues. It has positions upon which it educates and advocates, so the speakers will not present ideas for how to maintain or increase gun violence. In the course of tonight's forum, the audience will be invited to submit written questions which will be collected by League volunteers, these ladies over here, and given to the moderator to ask the panel at the conclusion of the presentations. The distinguished panel is Robert Steele, retired special agent of the FBI, Don McGill, program manager of the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence, Laura Frisch, volunteer for Moms Demand Action Against Handgun Violence, and Christopher Wilson, an attorney with Perkins Coie, who successfully defended Highland Park's ban on assault weapons. One commercial. See our activities on www.lwv-lflb.org and on Facebook. And now I'm glad to introduce our moderator, Joy Guscott-Mueller, who is an attorney practicing in Lake Forest and Chicago and a League board member. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you to all of you for turning out this evening. It's really wonderful to see so many folks here. As we all know, this is an issue that people, regardless of their position, are very passionate about. And so we really appreciate you coming and spending your time with us here this evening. I have the pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Bob Spiel. During Bob's most of his 20-year FBI career, he worked in the New York and Chicago offices of the Bureau and was almost exclusively assigned to the theft and forgery of fine art objects and also to the theft of other collector's items. For us Chicagoans, one of the investigations for which Bob was responsible concerned the Cezanne theft at the Art Institute of Chicago in 1978. The Cezanne theft was then the largest museum theft ever to take place in United States history. Investigation by the FBI and the Chicago Police Department resulted in the arrest and conviction of a museum employee and the recovery of 3 stolen masterpieces, then worth about $3 million. At least one of them is now always on display on the second floor. Bob's work with the FBI included many other accomplishments in this area, and upon leaving the FBI in 1988, he formed Robert E. Spiel Associates. This firm's practice is limited to protective and investigative assistance to museums, collectors, and dealers in rare collectibles. Bob is a certified protection professional as well as an Illinois licensed professional investigator. He obtained his bachelor's degree from Yale University in 1965 and a law degree from Northwestern University in 1968. After graduation from law school, he received an appointment as a special agent with the FBI. Bob is a member of the Society of Former Special Agents of the FBI, the American Society for Industrial Security, the Arts Club, and a life member of the Art Institute of Chicago. After that, Cezanne crew. So please welcome Bob Spiel.
Thank you, Joy. It certainly sounds like I don't know much about guns, so what am I doing here? I think the reason I was asked is, number one, I live not too far from here, and also the FBI would take us out about once a month and train us in the use of firearms. And there'd be something new as to a type of firearm, or there'd be an incident which they wanted us to learn about, and so they'd talk to us about that during these monthly meetings. And so I can talk in simple terms, and I hope that helps. If any of you are experts in this area, what I have to say, or much of what I say, will go over your head. You won't need it, but I mean go under your head. But I will try to explain and hope it helps. The chart on my left tells me basically all I need to know about guns for these purposes tonight. It's an amateurish chart. I apologize for that, but by the next time I will maybe have learned to operate with Kinkos well enough to get something more professional. It's easier for me to do with these transparencies and stuff, but not something like that. But I hope you can read it. The chart shows, most of all, I hope, that there are only 3 types of guns, just 3. At the top, you see the type of gun which is called a single shot. That gun is not much of a problem to us, so I'm not going to talk much about it. The second type is where we have most of our problems, and that one's called semi-automatic or repeating guns. The third type, again, not because it's not a deadly type of gun, the machine gun or fully automatic, but because it is not out there, to my knowledge, killing people the way that middle type is. Each of those 3 gun styles comes in 2 sizes. As I said, they're big and small. Should I turn that chart a little bit more that way? Can everybody see it well enough? There's, that's a little simplistic, big and small, but each of those three types comes in those 2 sizes. And in the small size, in the middle type, is where we have a bad problem because those guns can be concealed. The characteristic of each type is pretty simple, the main characteristic, although they come in a lot of models and features, like just like cars, and some are slightly different mechanically, but each type has one basic functional characteristic. The single shot is you fire it once, and you have to reload it to fire it again. The second type, you can fire it more than once until the gun is empty, but you can only pull the trigger and expect one bullet to come out of the other end. The machine gun, you pull the trigger and you can have as many bullets as you want come out of that other end. until the gun is empty. You don't have to take your finger off. As long as you don't take your finger off the trigger, it keeps firing. There's a little bit of confusion about two guns where they belong. The automatic pistol, I didn't have space to write that there, but that belongs in the second group, one trigger pull, one shot. Some people might think that because it's an automatic weapon. Yes, sir.
I do apologize. That is some false information. I'm a
Okay,
certified
excuse me.
instructor.
I'm sorry, I'm going to exercise my prerogative as moderator. With all due respect to you, sir, we want to hear your question and your statement, and we will have a volunteer get a card to you, and if you will write that down, I will present the questions at the end. But we have 4 speakers, and our format at the league is we want to give everyone equal time to speak, and then we want time for an exchange of ideas through questions. So I
Joy,
appreciate.
considering that this is a forum, would you mind having somebody from the opposite side
Please do
being
what
a
you
speaker?
said.
Excuse me.
Please do what you said.
Our speakers are people that have been chosen by the league, and we've set forth the league's position in this context, and you will have ample opportunity to provide your comments on your card, and I
Will
will
it be
present
screened
them.
like all the other sessions I've been to?
Would you please write your question, and I will be presenting them.
All right,
All
I
right,
hope so.
thank you. Thank you very much.
There's nothing specific. It's just generalities.
Excuse me, this is a league forum, this is the procedure, and that's the way it's going to be.
It would be nice if they were factual.
We're here to listen to them. We're here to
It's
listen.
automatic
If you want to have
pistol.
your own forum, you can go have it. This is
An
a league
automatic pistol
forum.
is a machine gun.
Excuse me. As moderator, I'm asking folks to abide by our format. This is not a format held by any other organization but the League of Women Voters. We have not designed this format for this topic. This is if you go to our functions, any of our functions, this is the format that is followed. We have the speakers speak for their allotted time, and then questions are written down and presented to volunteers who bring them up to us. So the only way we can get through all of this material is to follow this protocol. So I appreciate you cooperating, and thank you very much.
I'm anxious to take any question from anybody, but I think it would be easier to keep going what I have to say. I did check on the accuracy. I said before it was simplistic in nature because I wasn't sure everybody was a gun expert or was a longtime student of guns. Oh, well, what I said was that all I was saying was a semi-automatic pistol is not an automatic machine gun. It fires one bullet for one trigger pull. And I'd be happy to dispute that point or any other, as long as we go by our schedule. The other type of gun which causes some confusion as to classification, and I'm looking forward to Chris talking more about this, is what's an assault rifle. Again, I didn't have a chance to put, or space to put that in there. That, to some people, is a machine gun and would therefore be illegal. To some people, it is no different than the other middle category guns, the repeaters and the semi-automatics. It fires one shot for one trigger pull. It looks, and maybe this is the difference, it looks like a standard military issue gun that most armies in the world carry. And therefore, it may be generally known as an assault rifle. But I don't know really what it is that we're legislating about if it's not a machine gun. But we'll find out when Chris talks. Now, I'm not a legal scholar, but I'd like to say a few words about the Second Amendment. Its exact language was that the right to bear and keep arms shall not be infringed, was the word. And that went eventually to the Supreme Court. And there, over a period of time, the court divided into two groups. One group I'll call the balancers, and the other I'll call the absolutists. Sometimes legal scholars call them other things, but the point I'm trying to make is that the absolutists would say that at that time, if we have an amendment that says we're not going to infringe the right to bear arms, that means we can carry a gun concealed in the street anytime we want, because to forbid us to do so would be an infringement. We can possess as many as we want. We shouldn't have to fill out any of these silly forms. But eventually the absolutist position became eroded, and we now have the balancers in charge. By balancers, I mean there's an attempt to weigh a constitutional right, which is any constitutional right is an important right, but there's an attempt to weigh that right against the necessity of doing something really important for public safety. And it has to be really, really important for anybody to erode this right or do anything to restrict it. With all of the gun violence that's going on, I'd like to suggest some approaches, because the horrific gun violence and the amount of it was our main topic tonight. What can we effectively and efficiently do to bring these horrible numbers down as close to zero as possible if we can? I remember when I was growing up there was no gun violence like this. People were getting murdered. As a matter of fact, people were freer to use guns, but there were no horrific incidents like we've had. The approach I'm generally going to take is what I call incremental, and that means the greater the problem gets, the greater you ratchet up or increase responses to it, and the responses become more intense. For example, we have high-capacity magazines, which I think is one of the villains in this situation. I have thought about it, though, and I have moderated my views on that because of an incident that happened to us, the FBI, years ago in Miami. In that incident, there was one of the FBI's most horrific gun battles, leaving 2 agents dead and 2 bank robbers dead. There were a total of 4 agents there and 2 bank robbers. And it went on for a long period of time. And when it was over, the bank robbers were autopsied. What was found in their bodies was almost 20 bullets. If there'd been some high-capacity magazines there, maybe those 2 agents would have been alive. But at that time, the agents had to shoot 6 bullets, one at a time. And after that, they had to reload and do it again, all under this fire that was coming at them. So I have been, since then, much more sympathetic about high-capacity magazines, because people like these bank robbers don't necessarily just attack law enforcement. And we also have to remember that criminals act in gangs quite often, and we saw how many bullets flew across that parking lot in Waco, Texas, a few days ago. And if you were had to confront that, or even a part of that, you'd want a higher capacity magazine. So, what do we do about these? We can either block the magazines so they only hold as many bullets as we legislatively as a group want. We don't have to limit it to 5 necessarily, or 3 or 4 or anything like that. We can increase the number of bullets when the situation seems to demand it, because things are getting more out of hand, and we can reduce them. We can also raise the bar to get a high-capacity magazine. Someone has to be a more seasoned firearms owner to go in and buy one. The other thing that I also think could be solved by incremental approaches is background checks. Any background check can be more thorough and more intense, or less thorough and more intense. Right now, I think they're not very thorough, and I don't even remember having have a fingerprint taken when my firearms owner's card was issued. Identifying copycat areas where we have the most problems. One I'm thinking of is schools, of course. In these, as you may know, the national banks, the FDIC banks, are required to put security measures in the banks, things like cameras. And why couldn't we do the same thing with schools if we wanted to? Or theaters, even military bases. We saw it at Fort Hood that I just learned this, as a matter of fact, that none of the soldiers walking around the base can carry a weapon with them unless they have a particular right to do so. And then finally, non-lethal disabling weapons perhaps should be more available and used more. By that, I'm thinking of tasers, pepper spray, rubber bullets, and tranquilizer guns. You have to be trained to use them, of course. You just can't go into a store and buy them. But there should be less objection about fatally hurting, killing the wrong person by accident using those as a security measure. And I finally, I was thinking of counter media in the high schools. The high schools are taught about drug problems in their science classes, and maybe that works as much as we want, maybe it doesn't. But why couldn't they also be taught about what a real gun violence is, except what they see other than what they see on the video game? The appropriate age would have to be selected, of course, and then there's a couple of ways that could be done using video and actual autopsies. That will sober potential killers up a little bit. We have a lot of speakers, including you out there, that are interesting, and I'm anxious to hear. So I am going to sit down and say thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob. Our next speaker is Laura Frisch, a volunteer with Moms Demand Action. Moms Demand Action was founded by stay-at-home mom Shannon Watts on December 15th, 2012, in response to the devastating shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School. The organization quickly flourished into a leading force for gun violence prevention, with chapters in all 50 states and a powerful grassroots network of moms that have successfully effected change at the local, state, and national level. In December 2013, Moms Demand Action partnered with Mayors Against Illegal Guns to unite a nationwide movement of millions of Americans working together to change the game and end the epidemic of gun violence that affects every community. Moms Demand Action supports the Second Amendment, but they believe common sense solutions can help decrease the escalating epidemic of gun violence that kills too many of our nation's children and loved ones every day. Please welcome Laura Frisch from Moms Demand Action.
Good evening. Thank you for coming here. I really appreciate it. What I'd like to start with is just how I got involved with Moms Demand Action. It was shortly after Sandy Hook. It was the 4th of July, actually. After Sandy Hook, I was at a 4th of July parade, and I saw the Moms Demand Actions marching at the parade, and I talked to them about it, and many of my own concerns, not only being a mom, but being a teacher of preschoolers. I teach in a little field house, and there isn't a lot of security there, and my concern was what is happening in our culture and our communities with the guns. So I got involved, and I naturally got involved with our newest campaign, which I'm very excited about because I really feel that maybe tonight I could actually save one life, and it would be worth it. So our new campaign is called Be Smart, and you just need to know SMART. It's pretty simple. Our Be Smart campaign starts with S, and sorry about that. And what I want to talk to you about is a story about Alexis. Alexis was a 3-year-old toddler, and she was at home, and she was in February of 2015, just this year, she was actually able to find an unsecured gun, and she accidentally had that gun go off, and she was killed. It was very sad, and it was preventable. This was, her father was cleaning his guns, and the kids were out of the house, and when he left, he had to leave very quickly, and he left the gun unattended, and when his wife came home, she didn't realize that the guns were out. And unfortunately, it's a very common thing that happens. And to let you know kind of how often it happens, about 100 deaths a year happen from unsecured guns. This is not an intruder. This is not anything happening like that. This is actually just children finding guns that are unsecured and accidentally shooting each other. This is not, that doesn't even include the statistics of teen suicide. So the first one of the Be Smart command is, sorry about that, is that you want to realize what's going on. You want to secure your guns. If you have guns in your home, the safest way to secure your gun is to have the gun itself locked away from the ammunition and to have the ammunition out of the gun if you have small children in your house. That is the safest way to do that. It also includes the car as well. A lot of people have their car in the glove compartment or put it in the trunk, and there's a latch inside the car that you can pull for the trunk. The glove compartment easily can be opened. So it's a matter of making sure that your gun is secure and that it is safe. And it's not just about your gun that's controlled and that's safe. It's also about any gun that someone might have who your children might be with. The next part of this is the M, And sorry about that. The M is to model, and you want to model correct behavior with guns. If you have guns in your home, you want to make sure that you're modeling that behavior. We have here a list. This isn't actually a Moms Demand Action list. This is from the National Shooting Sports Foundation, and this is what they recommend before choosing a firearm for home security. And they're telling us that they're saying you should ask these questions. Are your security concerns realistic and consistent with the local crime rates as to why you're getting a gun? Do other adults in my household support maintaining a gun in the house? So how are those other people in the house going to be responsible for that gun that's in the house? Will other adults with access to the firearms join the person who's getting the gun in firearm training and safety program? And that's very important to have that happen. And what precautions will you practice to safeguard for the children who are in the home or children who might come to the home? And those are very important questions. And then there's a risk factor that you need to think about, and that's the question of, is there any mental illness or drug or alcohol abuse that exists within the household, and is it safe to have guns in a household with those things happening in that household? And those are things that the National Shooting Sports Foundation asks you to think about before you bring a gun into your home. The next part is actually an ask. The A is for ask, and what you want to do is you want to ask the people who are around your children, who are around you, ask them if they have guns. And sometimes it's a difficult question to ask, and we don't always think about it, but there's so many things that we do ask before we go on a play date, before we send the kids to grandma or grandpa's. There are so many things that we do that are simply safety measures. We have caps, all of our medicines have children's safety caps on them. When we have very small children in the house, we have safety things put on our ovens to make sure that our children don't turn the oven on. We have latches so that our children can't get into the cabinets with poison. And that's what we're asking, is to put your guns in the same category of those dangerous things for our children. What I'd like to do is I'd kind of like ask somebody earlier to kind of be my guinea pig. So, Sharon, if you can come on up here. And we're going to do a little bit of a role play. So this is just a simple kind of me asking as though I was going to go and have my kids go to her play date. This is actually a role play of something that I asked not recently of my son. He went to a friend's house for the first time, and these were some of the questions that I asked. So, hi, Sharon. Nice to meet you. Ari said that he wanted to go to your house for a play date. And I just have a couple things I have to ask.
Sure, we'd love to have him over.
That's great, thank you. He's allergic to nuts. Do you guys have nut bowls of nuts sitting around? He just needs to know if it's out there.
No, they're put away in the cabinet.
Okay, that's fine. He's okay with that, and I'll send him with his EpiPen, so he'll be fine with that. And then my other question is, do you guys have a swimming pool? If the weather's nice, I don't know if the boys are going to go out there. Should we bring trunks? Do you have like an adult out there watching kids, or?
We don't have a pool.
Oh, for real then. And then my other question is this: do you guys have guns in the house?
We don't have any guns in our house.
Okay, I just need to ask that. And then the other thing was that just so you know, we have dogs and we have cats, so he understands how to, leave those alone and not pet them, not hug them or anything like that. So that's great. I really appreciate it, and thanks. So I'll call you later.
Okay.
And we'll set the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
The reason I played that out, because sometimes it's really kind of scary to broach that subject, which it shouldn't be. This is another safety precaution for our children that we should be able to do. I have been doing this with some friends, and along with the person that I sent my son to their house the other day. But I've been doing this with some friends, and the other day I talked to a friend of mine my children have played at their house for many, many years. And she knows how I feel about guns and that I really want my children to be safe. And she disclosed to me after many, many years of going to her house that it turns out she didn't realize that her husband did have their hunting rifle in their house. She thought it was in Wisconsin, at their house in Wisconsin. And it turns out that his hunting rifle, she said he does have it, and I just looked at her and I said, it's in the top of your closet, isn't it? And she said, how did you know? And I said, because that's where people keep their guns. It's in a box in the top of their closet. So I explained to her, I said, you know your kids know it's there. 70% of children, found it through a Harvard study, know where the guns are in their home. 36% of their children have actually handled those guns without their parents' knowledge. So it is very important that we understand if our children are going to be finding that chocolate bar that you hid for Saturday night, if they're going to find ways to hide things from you and ways to find things in the house, they're going to find any guns that you have in the house. And unless you have them locked, unless you have that key locked away from the guns, and unless you have the ammunition locked separately, they're going to be able to get to those guns. And this comes over to our R. So on the R, there's a risk of responsibility. There's a risk anytime that you have guns in your house, but there's a risk that we need to talk about, and I'm being sensitive because I know we have some teenagers out there. When we are teenagers, we have hormones, we have all sorts of things going on in our minds and our bodies, and some days we think that it's the end of the world when someone doesn't like us, or when someone says something mean to us, or when we fail a test. And even students, even children who are doing great, who you think are doing just fine, can get to a point where they really feel like it's easier to end it than to go on. I will tell you a story. Fortunately, this didn't involve a gun, but when I was growing up, one of my best friends was valedictorian of our high school. She was at the end of her high school year, and she was, because of a calculated summer class that the valedictorian took in a college course, going to lose that valedictorian. And she was going to be valedictorian, so she would be second and he would be first. She called me the night before when she found out. And this is someone who is so confident, is so amazing. I mean, she's the kind of student who thought she could do anything. She worked with Nancy Reagan on the Just Stay No program. She actually worked with Nancy. And she was just an amazing person. And she called me in the middle of the night, and she wanted to end it. Her parents didn't have guns in their house. The difference between having a gun in your house, that 85% of attempts of suicide with a gun actually happen, as opposed to overdosing with drugs, 2% of those work. So it does go to show you the difference and what you have to worry about. So you want to make sure that you're reducing the risk, and you want to make sure that you talk to your teens about it. We do have a sheet on the other side about suicide warning signs for teens. If you're concerned, if you're worried about it, it's right over there, and it does have some numbers to call if you are concerned about that. And there is a national hotline to call. Our next part of this is T, and this is really just talk about it. Talk about what we've just discussed this evening. Talk about whether grandma, grandpa, whoever it is, has some unsecured guns in their home. Is it in the car? Today, I just want to thank you, by the way, for saving the Cezanne at the Art Institute. I took my nephew from Texas. My nephew is he's a medic in the Air Force, and he actually just got back from Africa, working with Ebola doctors and nurses and training them. And I was talking with him about this because I was going to be giving this speech tonight, and certainly they live in a different environment than we do. And as I was actually showing him the Cezanne at the Art Institute, we talked about this, and I talked to my friend who is his mother, and we talked, and she is she has a concealed carry license, and she carries, and she told me, she said, I only take it because I need it at the ranch, and she has a ranch in Texas, and she explained how she takes it to the ranch, and she has a lockbox in her trunk, and she keeps it locked up in there. She has a 7-month-old nephew, and she cares for him during the day, and she makes sure that he's not able to have any access to that. And we really talked about it, and it was a very interesting conversation because it was about the things that I talked about here, and it was about my nephew and his views and you know, where he feels that he needs to carry his guns and how he carries it. And so I think that that is some of the things to think about. You know, that even a 7-month-old baby, you don't think about getting into things, but often it is these 1 and 2 and 3-year-olds who are getting it. Last weekend, a 3-year-old was in a car and there was a gun that was not locked, and that 3-year-old got the gun and shot their 1-year-old baby sister. So these are things that are happening, but that we can make a difference about. So please think about this. I have some flyers over there. If you are, we're trying to be as green as possible. So if you did take one of these because you wanted to learn about it and you feel like you've gotten enough information from this, feel free to put it back on the table. I can use it the next presentation that I do. If you want to take any of these, that's great. But if you can get the information and then return it, that would be even greener of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura.
Oh, and sorry, one last thing. There is a video, and Moms from Action has a video that explains the SMART. It's 5 minutes. If you feel like you might want to send it to a relative or send it to anyone who you think might benefit, or you want to start that conversation, I think John has it on the cable TV, and there will be a link through that, so you can get it through there. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Dion McGill. Dion is the program manager for the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence. Dion is responsible for ICHV's Activist Institute program and teaching that program in schools throughout the Chicagoland area. Dion is an Army veteran with a background in education, most recently teaching in the Chicago Public Schools before joining ICHV. John has a Bachelor of Arts degree from St. Xavier University and is a lifelong resident of Chicago who currently lives in the Mount Greenwood community on Chicago's South Side. The Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence is the oldest and largest statewide organization in the U.S. working to prevent this devastation caused by firearms. Founded in 1975 by 4 suburban Chicago women concerned about the tragic consequences of handgun proliferation and availability, ICHV works on a variety of fronts to educate, raise public awareness, and build coalitions to enact change in laws and behavior. For 39 years, ICHV has been a leader among state gun violence prevention groups. For more information on the efforts of Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence, go to ICHV.org. And I'd like you to welcome Dion McGill.
Good evening. Yeah, all right. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you what makes me qualified to be at the ICHV. I'm going to take a page out of his book. And then I'm going to tell you a couple stories. I'm going to take a page out of her book. And then I'm going to offer some proposals, okay? I'm not going to propose to marry anybody. But other than that, I'm going to offer some proposals. So first, my qualifications, right? What makes someone qualified to deal with guns? I have no idea. But, so I grew up in Roseland, South Side Chicago. I'm 11 years old. I remember moving out of Roseland the same year. If you're familiar with the story of Robert Yummy Sandifer, if you're not familiar with that story, look it up. He was a Time magazine cover person. But to make a long story short, Yummy, Robert Sandifer, was like a 11, 12-year-old who basically was used by a gang to attempt to assassinate another child. He missed the intended target, hit an honor student, female, killed her, went into hiding, and the gang used him initially because he was 11. He's not going to go to jail. He's a great gunman. And then eventually killed him because they knew that he'd give up names. So I moved out of Roseland the same summer that happened, and I moved to the suburbs where things like that didn't necessarily happen. So from there, I went through life, and I ended up in the military. So I was in the Army for 9 years. I functioned as an MP when we went to New Orleans following Hurricane Katrina. Before that, I was in Germany for a while. Finally, I went to Afghanistan for a year. And so I've had a lot of interaction with the types of guns and with guns. And then from there, I became a teacher. So I taught 2 years in Alaska, rural Alaska, which is a very gun-oriented culture. I've sat in a bear stand, but I'm a bowman, Genesis compound, so, you know, that's me. And then I came back and taught in CPS. And that's really, I think, that was when I became the person who would really become a member of the ICHV. Because if you're a teacher in Chicago, it's only a matter of time, which is a sad statement. It's only a matter of time before you have a student that you lose. So you lose them either to being shot or being a shooter. And I've had both. I've actually had both within the last 2 months. I've had one student who attempted a drive-by unsuccessfully. His girlfriend was one of my best students. She's now 6 months pregnant. He's now incarcerated. And when his case is done, he'll definitely be incarcerated. And then I just actually, a week and a half ago, had a student, former student. He was a freshman when I had him last year. So now he'd be a sophomore. And he was shot in the butt in an attempted drive-by in a park in the Backyards neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. So when I left CPS, I heard about this position as a program manager at ICHV, and I said, you know what, that's me, because I've had an interaction with guns for most of my life, and as a teacher, that negative interaction, I was like, maybe I can change that a little bit, have some effect. I'm gonna tell you a couple stories, because I don't connect with numbers, statistics. I know everyone loves them. You throw them out there, and people are like, ooh, and we can argue and debate them, but I was always an English guy, poetry, stories. So let me tell you a quick story, very quick. So there was this young man, and he left school one day, right? CPS school, and he hopped on the bus with some friends. So the bus goes, another kid comes up about a block down, and this kid also hops on the bus. So he'd been fighting and arguing with another young man over a girl, and he began shooting on the bus, let loose a lot of shots. The young man jumped in front of the young lady sitting next to him to protect her, and he was shot and killed. She was shot, but she lived. 5 other people were actually shot on the bus in addition to him, and they all lived. He was the only fatality. And if you're familiar with that story, some of you may be, that young man was Blair Holt. And Blair Holt was a huge story. So this was in 2007. So Blair's mother was the first fire captain in the city of Chicago, firefighter, and she still is a firefighter. And his father is now a police commander. So, you know, he came from this family that was just kind of respected and involved in what Chicago does, you know, police, firemen, you know, that's kind of what we're known for. And so it became a big story. So recently, I happened to go to the high school that he went to, and some students, 2 young ladies, said, you know what, we should take the things that happen here and try to turn a positive spin on them, you know, absolutely. So they actually have a thing called Peace Day. So Peace Day this year was actually May 11th, so, you know, 10 days ago. And they used that day to commemorate him, particularly. He was the focus. So I went to that recently, and it was beautiful. There was singing, there was dancing, choir. I met Rahm Emanuel's wife there. Bobby Rush was there. Another senator whose name I don't quite remember was there. There was a lot, you know, dignitaries. Joakim Noah's mother was there because he was in the playoffs. And the moment came where they, you know, it was kind of like they brought his picture up and his name, and we miss you, and he would be 25 this year. And then they actually had a thing, they called him a fallen rose. And then they brought up these pictures, they said, the other fallen roses of our school. And as those pictures started flipping, I started counting. I was like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. I stopped counting at 12, but the pictures did not stop flipping. And as a teacher, you know the teachers here? You know, teaching is like it's not a job, it's a calling, right? It's something that's in your heart. And as a teacher, it's just something that's, you know, in you to want to help. And when you see these young people being killed, some of them, you know, I mean, a lot of them, it hits you in the heart. And so we did the Peace Day thing. 2 days after the Peace Day thing, So this would have been May 13th. Two students, former students, alumni from that school. One came home from college, picked up his buddy. They were going to get suits to take out two young ladies from that school. They were shot and killed. Both were shot, did not make it. The person who was in the back seat is still alive. He's still in the hospital. So needless to say, this school is, man, they're dealing with some issues. And that's the kind of thing that the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence wants to prevent. And there's, other stories. If you're familiar with Ryan Mace, she was a victim at Northern Illinois University. I mean, in my job, the names, there's so many of them, and you really want to connect with them. That's why I don't like numbers, because I can give you numbers. I'll give you numbers, just throw them out there, right? So just this week, I'm from Chicago, so my numbers are always Chicago numbers. I do apologize. I know there's another whole big part of the state that's not Chicago, so please don't be offended. But so far in Chicago, so this week, 3 people have been shot and killed. What day is it? So Thursday, so March Friday. So 3 people shot and killed. The weekend's not here yet, right? Because the weekend is always a little crazier in Chicago. 34 were shot and wounded. And there were 4 homicides so far in Chicago this week. So 3 of those were gun-related. This month, we've had 17 shot and killed. So in the month of May, this is the 21st, we've had 173 shot and wounded. And then there were 22 homicides. So it's not like people are running around with knives as much as they are running around with guns and the gun violence that we're seeing in Chicago. And so far this year, 123 have been shot and killed. That number's low because we're now at whatever time it is. So these numbers are from this morning, so they're already higher. We've had approximately 6 days this year that had no homicides, and so a lot of those days were actually colder days as well. So as it was 73 driving here, the reality is that the kids were out, the guys who did not mean well were out, and we'll see some more homicides in the morning. And the total homicides so far this year in Chicago is 145. So that number will also grow. So those are statistics, but that's really not my thing. So I'm gonna offer some proposals, okay? Because the question I think was, what can we do to prevent this? What can we do to pull back these numbers? So here's some things I propose, okay? So the first thing I propose, and this is kind of like, it seems like, oh, this is normal, of course, right? I propose that we can disagree without being disagreeable. And so here's the proposition. So I was asked to do this at last minute. The gentleman who was supposed to be here, Mark, is way smarter than me. Way more. He's way smarter than me. He's just an awesome gentleman. I go in his office every day to learn and to kind of pick his brain. And he said, I need you to go do this for me. I said, absolutely. And so I told a friend, I said, hey, I'm going to speak at this thing. It's the League of Women Voters. We're going to be talking about gun violence. And this friend actually happens to be a member of the NRA and the ISRA. And so he sent me this email. And he said, dude, is this what you're talking about? And I read it. I said, whoa, I'm not a gun grabber. I said, I'm not a subversive, right? These are the things that were in the email. The gun grabbers are coming to take our rights and indoctrinate our children. And I was like, I'm not coming to do any of that, right? I'm coming to just give some ideas on how we can make the streets safer, not just in Chicago, because guns are not a Chicago problem. They're everywhere. They're on school campuses. They're, in neighborhoods. Children are either finding them or children are using them to go and find other children. So it's a problem we're seeing everywhere in every aspect of American society now. And this leads to my second proposal. I don't really see two sides to this discussion, because I don't think there's anybody who would disagree that any time a child is killed, it's a tragedy. And if there's somebody who says, well, that's not necessarily the case, then yeah, okay, maybe there are two sides. And we're definitely going to disagree, right? Because the neighborhoods I go into, 13-year-olds, right, are shooting 13-year-olds. And 21-year-olds are shooting, if you heard in the news recently, a 7-year-old, right? In the Morgan Park neighborhood was shot, I believe it was fatally, but I'm not certain. But a 7-year-old was shot in a drive-by in the middle of the day, and that to me is just, I can't imagine anyone in this room who would say that's not a tragedy. So I really don't think that there's two sides to this issue. We disagree, you're trying to restrain my ability to have this. That's life. That's a little bit of democracy. We always talk about democracy, and democracy is freedom. Well, your freedom only goes as far as my freedom goes. So democracy is generally based on some sense of compromise, right? And if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong. But
We can't. We can't.
on your cards, yeah, you can tell me. That's fine.
Rhetorical question.
Absolutely.
Please write your questions down.
Please write it on the card.
Looking at us, and I'm dying, trying to hold it back, but he's asking questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And please write it down.
Rhetorical.
Yes, please write it down. And we'll totally talk about it at the end, for sure. But like I said, if we do disagree on these issues, then okay, we can have that debate while being agreeable, right? So from there, this is what some of the things that the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence works on to try to prevent, and these are some ideas that come from my boss and the people, our partners, and the people we work with. So something, and I firmly believe this personally, that background checks is a amazing way to attempt to limit handgun violence. Are you guys familiar with how gun sales, is everyone here familiar with how gun sales work? Some of you are, absolutely. Absolutely. If you're not, and the term we use, the banded term is universal background checks, right? So if you go to a store, and like if I say something that's wrong, please write it on your card. You can tell me about it. I have no problem. I'm not always right. You go into the store, they do a background check, right? And they're doing a system that most people call NICS. And it, it goes, you go in, you do your paperwork, it comes out, this person can legally own a gun, and you have your FOID card, right? And so you go and you make your purchase, and you do your training, and you have you have what you wanted. So what happens in Chicago, unfortunately, is that people who are FOID card holders, who can legally buy guns, go in, and they'll buy a couple, right? Which is not necessarily, hey, that's cool. And then that person will go and sell to someone that they know cannot legally buy a gun, right? And that person who cannot legally hold a gun now goes down the street and shoots some kid that he's beefing with, or some kid that looks like the kid that he really wants to shoot, and you get the things that we see. So I personally believe, and legislatively, universal background checks have been pushed here in Illinois. And that's something I think that needs to be discussed, debated, absolutely. But I feel that if you are a legal gun holder, I can't imagine why you would have an issue with people who buy privately having to do the exact same thing that you've done, right? I have to open the door to walk through it. I have no problem with the person behind me having to do the same thing. That's fine. It's not a huge issue. Time. So real quick, two more things. The other one goes with something called gun dealer licensing. So the same thing. There's some gun shops, particularly in Chicago, and I'm not going to name any names because I don't want to embarrass anybody, but there's some gun shops that we know. We know as sure as night follows day are selling guns that are going out into the streets, like in mass numbers. One gun shop in particular, from 2009 to 2013, 1,500 guns were recovered in crimes in Chicago and traced back to this one gun shop. And that was the most in the United States, from one gun shop. So if you have 1,500 guns that are floating out, if you have 1,500 guns, on your card, please. On your card, please. That's okay. If you have 1,500 guns that are floating out from your store and are ending up at crime scenes, you have an issue. That I personally don't think that's debatable. You have an issue. What the issue is the debatable part. And it's something that needs to be fixed. It's something that needs to be fixed. What the issue is, okay. And then finally, you know what? I'll stick with those two. I'll totally stick with those two. So hopefully I've offered some things for you to think over, to think about. And thank you to the League of Women Voters for allowing me to come, and thank you for coming, and thank you even for my ISRA friends for coming as well.
Thank you, Dion. Our next speaker is Christopher B. Wilson. On June 24th, 2013, the City of Highland Park passed an ordinance prohibiting the possession, sale, or manufacture of certain types of weapons and large capacity magazines. The City of Highland Park was sued, and it was requested that the court make a determination that the ordinance was unconstitutional and issue an injunction barring its enforcement. Chris successfully argued in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals in federal court, successfully argued and defended the City of Highland Park's right to have that ordinance on the books. He is a partner in the firm of Perkins Coie and managing partner of the Chicago office. He represents clients in a variety of complex commercial cases and litigation matters. He has represented a number of Fortune 500 companies in high-stakes cases, including the Boeing Company in connection with its shareholder derivative actions involving the Dreamliner 787, Microsoft Corporation in trade secrets and piracy matters, Amazon.com in Ketom auctions arising under the Illinois Whistleblower Act, and Career Education Corporation defending consumer class actions. In addition to his securities work, Chris has extensive trial experience in antitrust matters, unfair competition, and consumer fraud defense, and multiple defendant product liability matters. He is a graduate of the University of Michigan and the Northwestern University Law School. He has clerked for the Honorable William H. Bauer of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit in 1989 and 1990. And we welcome him here to talk to us about the Seventh Circuit's recent case and decision that happened only on April 27th, correct? All right. Well, please welcome Chris Wilson.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me. A personal note before we talk about gun cases. I grew up in Evanston, and my mom was the president of the League of Women Voters of Evanston, and served for many years before that. And so when I got a call, very nice voicemail message, I thought, there's no way I can't. My mom will be so disappointed if I don't come to this. Because I remember my brother and I, would say, what's for dinner tonight, Mom? And she'd say, hey, we're ordering in pizza. I have a meeting with the league. And now, which was a win-win, we got pizza and night off. And but now, several years later, I get to find out what she was doing at these meetings. And I'm so glad to be part of this and to be part of a community that takes time out, even on the evening of a Blackhawks game, to listen to the issues and debate both sides of the issues and to think about how to make their communities safer, but also being mindful of the constitutional imperatives that control some of the questions about how much we can regulate guns. So let me tell you a little bit about the Highland Park case and then about the decision that came down just a few weeks ago from the Seventh Circuit. To preface this, I should say anything I offer these are my views and my background and history. I represent the City of Highland Park. I continue to represent the City of Highland Park, but anything should not be construed as a statement that if I say something bad or dumb, it should not go on Highland Park. This is just me talking as an attorney who worked on the case and thought maybe it would be of interest to people here. So the background of the ordinance that Joy described is the assault weapons ban passed by Highland Park in June of 2013. Interestingly started when Illinois became the 50th state to pass a concealed carry law. We had lagged behind the rest of the country, and we're to the point where we were the only state that did not allow people to carry concealed weapons. But when they passed the law permitting that, they included a provision that said any law that is enacted by a municipality that has a ban on assault weapons is valid, provided it's done by July of 2013. So that created a window of just a few weeks for various municipalities who did not have an assault weapons ban to consider whether or not they should adopt one. And the City Council of Highland Park looked at, this was, very, within 6 months of the tragedy at Sandy Hook. They looked at this and looked at their own history and started considering whether or not it made sense to have an assault weapons ban in their community. And in the ordinance itself, they cited to 4 recent tragedies that had really gotten the attention of the city council, which were the tragedy in Newtown, Connecticut in December of 2012, in which 26 people were killed, including 20 6 and 7-year-olds in a matter of minutes. In 4 minutes, all of those kids were killed. Second was the events in Columbine. There was a theater in Columbine, Colorado, and in Aurora, Colorado. Columbine was a tragedy that had happened several years earlier, but in Aurora, Colorado, there were 70 people shot, 19 people killed in less than 15 minutes at a theater. People just going to the theater to enjoy a movie and were shot by one person with just an amazing amount of firepower. One of the weapons that he had would hold had a drum that held 100 rounds. Then there was the tragedy in Tucson, where the one that where Congresswoman Gabby Giffords was shot. That was 6 people were killed just outside of a grocery store on a Saturday afternoon, and they were killed in a matter of minutes by a gunman who had I think that the gun could hold 30 bullets, and he was assaulted by people in the crowd when he actually managed, when his gun had exhausted those 30 rounds. And so all of those people were shot. If it had just been a 10-round magazine, as awful as that sounds, most of those people, including Congresswoman Giffords, would not have been shot because the 10 bullets would have been fired and that the crowd could have subdued that person. But these massive magazines just produce so much carnage. There was another event in Santa Monica, California, that involved assault weapons. All of these were in the ordinance and referenced by the city council as reasons they were in support of an assault weapons ban. Finally, this wasn't in the ordinance, but it was something that was considered by the city council and the mayor in particular. I think we all remember the tragedy of Lori Dan in the late 80s. Lori Dan went into a school in Winnetka, along with Lake Forest, just an absolutely quiet, sleepy bedroom community, incredibly affluent, incredibly privileged in every way. And Lori Dan went in there and basically held a elementary school hostage and killed a student there. Before she went to do that, though, she had been in Highland Park where she had a bomb and walked through a school and just by the grace of God, decided she wasn't going to do that in Highland Park and went on to Winnetka. But Highland Park is one town over from Winnetka, and they knew about the Lori Dan incident and all remembered it all too well. So all of those tragedies led the Highland Park to say, we have to take action, we have to do something. And so they passed an assault weapons ban and a ban on large capacity magazines. So the law said it's illegal to have a magazine that accepts more than 10 rounds. So they put a cap on that. Second was, and this is to Rob's question, they defined an assault weapon as something that's capable of accepting a large capacity magazine, and then had 5 defined features, which our friends in the gun community would know much better than I, but some of these are a muzzle brake, a barrel shroud. We'll get to the questions, but there were 5 defined features, a thumb hole stock, and those were modeled after the federal assault weapons ban, which was passed in 1994 and then expired in 2004. So it's a fairly standard definition of an assault weapon. But these are, to the list over here, the guns that were banned by the Highland Park assault weapons ban were semi-automatic weapons. The machine guns are federally banned. You can't own an Uzi. But assault weapons, you can fire, are semi-automatic in that when you pull the trigger, they will fire until you stop pulling the trigger or you run out of ammunition. And second, these were precisely the type of weapons that were used in each of these tragedies. In Aurora, in Sandy Hook, and in Tucson, and in all too many others. So So they passed the ordinance, and a few months later, they were sued here in Lake County. The city of Highland Park was sued by Dr. Ari Friedman, who was a doctor in Highland Park who had assault weapons, and said it's an unconstitutional burden on me. It violates my Second Amendment rights to have to give up my assault weapons. I want to live in Highland Park, I want assault weapons, and I should have that right. Because the Second Amendment was implicated, that's a federal issue. And so the attorneys then handling the case, and we worked with another firm on this, Holland and Knight, which is a great law firm and represents the city of Highland Park municipally on all of their issues. But they had this initially. They removed the case to federal court. So now we're in federal court before Judge Dara. And there was initially a short hearing on whether or not there should be an injunction barring this ordinance from going into effect. And what they said was, what Judge Dara said is, I'm not ready to rule on that yet. I'm going to pass everything down. I want to have briefing on this. I want to have you have some discovery on this. And so what we did was each side had a battle of the experts. We had two retired agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. We had a woman who's a statistical expert from the University of Chicago Crime Lab. The other side had experts of professors from Florida State University who have written extensively about gun violence, but had argued on the other side. Anyway, we took depositions of all these people and submitted briefs on why this shouldn't be, why we didn't consider this and Highland Park didn't consider this to be a violation of the Second Amendment. Judge Dara, in September of 2014, held that this didn't violate the Second Amendment, that the restriction was reasonable in light of the danger that these guns presented. That was then appealed, and last month, the Seventh Circuit, we argued it in January, last month the Seventh Circuit affirmed Judge Dara by a vote of 2-1 and agreed that the restriction on assault weapons and on large capacity magazines was not an unconstitutional burden on the Second Amendment. Now, I don't know how much time I've burned away here, but let me just cover real quickly what was at issue in the case, what the arguments were. First is, for the Second Amendment establishes the right to keep and bear arms. It has a qualifying clause before it that says a well-regulated militia being necessary, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Up until 2008, that had always been interpreted as a right of militias. It was a well-regulated militia is what they're talking about there, and therefore the right to keep and bear arms means if you're part of a militia, you should be able to keep and bear arms. And in the 1930s, there was a case involving a gentleman by the name of Miller who was convicted of having a Tommy gun, an actual machine gun. It was back in the Al Capone eras, and the question was whether or not he could be prosecuted for having a machine gun, whether it was right to restrict machine guns. And if you're shaking your head, but you are shaking your head.
That's all we can do is shake our head.
You're correct. It's a sawed-off shotgun that was at issue there. There was also litigation at that time on whether or not machine guns could be banned. The decision in those cases was that the Second Amendment isn't implicated because it involves militias and is not an individual right. That was then litigated in 2008. The D.C. The District of Columbia had a ban, an absolute ban, as many municipalities did, on handguns. Said you just can't have a handgun in the District of Columbia. And Mr. Heller said, that infringes my Second Amendment rights, and that went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said many things. They said, you're right. The right preserved by the Second Amendment is not limited to militias. It's an individual right that's held by all citizens, and it's a right of self-defense, and you have a right to have a handgun, and any law that bans you from having a handgun is unconstitutional, and it violates the Second Amendment. That left open, but they also said the right to keep and carry any weapon, you do not have the right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever for whatever purpose. So there was a lot of gray area left over after Heller. One was, it's clear it bans handguns. It bans on handguns, but is the Second Amendment implicated by anything else? There was then a case called McDonald, which answered another question, which is, well, the District of Columbia is federal property. It's federal land. It's not a state. Does this decision apply to the states? And in McDonald versus the City of Chicago, the Supreme Court said, yes, this extends not just to the District of Columbia, but to all states, because the right to the individual right to a handgun is a universal right. It's an important one, and therefore the Second Amendment applies to the states as well. And so that actually came out of Chicago. So Heller and McDonald have been the law of the land since 2008 and 2010. And the question is, do assault weapons implicate the Second Amendment as well? The District of Columbia is the only other federal circuit that's ruled on that issue. The District of Columbia then passed another law that said, well, forget about handguns. We're banning assault weapons and large capacity magazines. Mr. Heller came back to court and said, no, that violates my Second Amendment rights. And the trial court disagreed. And then the District of Columbia circuit, there's a federal circuit just for the District of Columbia, they ruled 2-1 that the District of Columbia was right, that assault weapons are not covered by the Second Amendment. So they petitioned the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided not to take that case. A similar case in California called Fiach versus Sunnyvale had the question of whether or not this ban on large capacity magazines was constitutional. And there the Ninth Circuit said, we believe that a restriction on the number of rounds in a magazine, it does not violate the Second Amendment. That is constitutional. That again went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court declined to take it. There are a number of cases in addition to our case, the Highland Park case, that have been decided at the trial court level. All of the cases so far have held that it does not violate the Second Amendment to pass bans on large capacity magazines or on assault weapons as defined in the Highland Park Ordinance. Colorado, there was a case out there last summer that held that you could restrict magazines to 15 rounds. There's a case in Connecticut, that Shue versus Molloy, I believe, and a case in Maryland that both were recently decided that that upheld bans on assault weapons. Real quickly, the question for the court is, because there's so much open area left in the wake of Heller and McDonald, the courts have really struggled with how do we go about determining whether something violates the Second Amendment. And what they've come up with is a two-part question, a two-part analysis. First, is this the type of gun or material that's implicated by the Second Amendment? Is it commonly owned? Or is it dangerous and unusual? That is typically a difficult question. We had a lot of expert testimony on this. It's difficult to know whether something is really in common usage because the gun manufacturers don't keep statistics on this. There's a lot of people who've tried to get legislation passed to track gun manufacturers, gun sales. It's just not something that people keep track of. And our experts testified that a lot of the gun sales actually are then illegally trafficked to Mexico, and you really don't know how many guns there are in the United States. There are a number of people who've tried, but all the courts that have looked at it, the Seventh Circuit, Judge Dara said, we don't know. We can't answer this question. And so we're going to move to the second question. We'll assume they're commonly owned. Is the restriction imposed reasonable in light of the danger posed by those weapons? And that's where the Seventh Circuit said yes. And if I could, page 10 of Judge Easterbrook's opinion, and then I'll close. It says, a ban on assault weapons won't eliminate gun violence in Highland Park, but it may reduce the overall dangerousness of crime that does occur. And that's because a ban on assault weapons and large capacity magazines might not prevent shootings at Highland Park, where they are already rare, but it may reduce the carnage if mass shooting occurs. I think that's the crux of what the courts have wrestled with and ultimately decided why the Second Amendment isn't implicated, is because these weapons, assault weapons, and large capacity magazines, the damage that's done when they're used by the wrong people, the carnage is so horrific that the courts have decided it's okay to impose a restriction. We're not eliminating all guns. You can have handguns, you can have other long guns, but this category of weapon is simply too dangerous and causes such carnage when it's used improperly that it's okay to restrict them in communities that choose to do so. So the decision came down April 27th. The plaintiffs had until May 11th to ask for rehearing. They decided not to, but they have until July 25th to appeal to seek a petition to the Supreme Court. So as they say, watch this space. We'll find out what happens in July. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. Well, we have a very prolific audience in terms of the questions. So I'm going to do my best to get to all of them while making sure we don't stay here till midnight, unless you all want to do that. And what I will do is if we have questions that are duplicative, I'm going to try to combine them. And I'd ask our volunteers to do so as well. And if you have not gotten a card and you would like one and would like to ask a question, raise your hand and one of our volunteers will bring that over to you. And we'll also, if you need a pencil, I think they have some there that they will bring you. Yes?
Have the volunteers seen all of those questions?
They haven't, they've seen most of them, but not all. And so we will.
Okay, because they're there to help you. So
Yes. Okay, all right. Well, the first one is for Chris, but I think you've already answered this, but do other federal circuit courts have similar cases pending?
Yes, there's one pending in the Fourth Circuit, one pending in the First Circuit that I know of, and there are several that are trailing. The Seventh Circuit's decision was only the second that involved assault weapons, though, in the country, and others will follow shortly.
Okay, thank you. This question was, did firearms manufacturers, I think this is also for you, Chris, did firearm manufacturers provide testimony in the Friedman case? What was their testimony that they provided, if they provided it?
The manufacturers submitted a supporting brief. They didn't provide, if I recall, they didn't provide testimony.
I'm sorry, we're looking for the microphone. I apologize. Okay. Did everyone hear that question that I asked? Okay.
I think it was 6 manufacturers filed a supporting brief in the Seventh Circuit, but they did not provide testimony. The experts were from the National Sports Shooting Foundation, I think, and several others, but they were not shooting sports.
Would you please turn the microphone on?
Actually, I think it's on to our panelists.
You have to talk into the top of the microphone.
Not the side, the top.
Okay. And then I'll take the spit. Was the Seventh Circuit's ruling in Friedman versus Highland Park done under strict scrutiny, is the question.
So
You may want to
a little bit of background. There are different levels of scrutiny applied to constitutional issues. And the most basic, if you say you wanted to impose a restriction saying we're not going to have allow ice cream sales on Sunday afternoon. It's just a straightforward law of ice cream sales. That's determined on a rational basis test. Is the law rational? That one might not be. So what's the difference about having ice cream on Sundays? So that a rational basis test is the lowest scrutiny applied. On the other hand, if you have something that implicates someone's race or their religion, those kinds of restrictions are evaluated under strict scrutiny, the highest scrutiny. There has to be a compelling state interest for the restriction imposed. This was not strict scrutiny, and no court has applied strict scrutiny to the Second Amendment cases. Intermediate scrutiny has been applied, and what that is a very open question and very fluid. And they really didn't, the Seventh Circuit just didn't do an analysis. The dissent commented on that, but they just applied somewhere between strict scrutiny and rational basis test.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to switch to another question for another panelist. Bob, this questioner said, your thoughts on the 3D printer, please. So I'm assuming that maybe someone's asking about the possibility of a 3D printer making a gun, and I'm not sure if you have anything to say about that.
That was me, that is correct.
Okay.
I know that there's,
If you could speak into the microphone.
I know that I've heard about things being made on printers, which you imagine being made on printers by a long shot, but I haven't heard about guns yet. I guess if it can be done with other objects, I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay. Thank you. Another question for Chris. Chris, Highland Park's assault weapons ban, this person is asserting that it says that the military can have the firearms in the course of their duty. Can you explain what that means? Does simply living in their military house fall under the course of their duty?
I don't know. There was an exception in the law for military people in the course of their duties. I think that also mirrored the federal legislation from 1994, so that if the National Guardsmen or so had a gun that they needed to have in their home for some reason, but it really didn't come up in our case. It wasn't an issue in the lawsuit.
And one person wrote a question. I guess they didn't understand what you meant when you said, what does in common use mean?
Whoever asked that is a very smart question, because the Supreme Court didn't define it, and a lot of the Seventh Circuit arguments were wrestling with that issue. What is in common use, and when do we measure in common use? Is it when the Second Amendment was passed, and what was in common use then? It's also, as the Seventh Circuit noted, it's kind of circular, because something might not be in common use because it was banned. Bazookas aren't in common use. Assault weapons weren't in common use until very relatively recently, this type that were banned by this ordinance. So it isn't clear, and so for that reason, both the trial court and the Seventh Circuit really moved on from there to decide it on the basis of intermediate scrutiny and the reasonableness of the restriction rather than on whether or not it was in common use.
Thank you. Dion, I have a question for you. This questioner asked the question, don't you think it's reasonable to arm teachers in schools to protect our children?
Man, that's an interesting question. It's tough. As a teacher, we talked about this question actually a lot. I taught in school in the South Side, and this was kind of like one of those questions that we'd be sitting around. I'm like, well, who's going to have the gun? And they're like, we're all going to have guns. And I look over my coworkers. I'm like, oh no. I was in the military. Some of y'all, no. You know. And then I remember reading an article where they said one person, and I think the article said something like the principal would have the gun. And one day I just kind of looked at the vice principal. I said, if that guy had a gun in this building, and someone came here to do harm, I would be not only horrified that there's a gunman in the building, but now this guy is running around with a gun. I said, he's probably going to hurt just as many people as any assailant's going to hurt. Do I think guns should be in schools with teachers? Personally, that's not an idea that I can co-sign, as they say, having been a teacher. But the schools that I all the schools I've ever taught at, well, no, schools in Chicago I've taught in or been in, have all had police in them. And so they do have, you know, that in them. And some of them have police on every, absolutely.
Got it.
Absolutely.
I'm on the south side, and I know exactly on every floor.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
And even that.
Yeah.
One kid in my school, this is an elementary school, got shot in the back and came back after school with a, he was paralyzed, remember, 7th grader. And then another kid died who was an 8th grader. That's just in 1 year.
Oh, absolutely. To answer the question finally, personally, that's just not something I'm a fan of. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, Dion. Okay. I am going to, I guess I'll address this to you, Bob, since you're a former law enforcement officer for the FBI, and I don't know if you have the answer to this question. Are law enforcement personnel sufficient in number and optimally placed? And I think what's implied in that, if I may, is that folks are thinking maybe they need guns so they can protect themselves. Do you have an opinion on that?
No, I'm afraid I don't understand the question.
Oh, okay.
Whoever wrote it, can they elaborate a little bit?
I wrote it because Mayor Emanuel is always talking about getting the police out of the offices, and onto the beat, and concentrating them in areas that are high crime, and then other neighborhoods feel unprotected. So is that something that needs to be improved or not?
I understand the question, thank you. I don't know, because there's a reason for keeping the policemen inside buildings and there's a reason for sending them out. I'd have to evaluate, just like the police administrators do on an individual basis to answer that. But it's kind of like ice cream, you can always use more policemen out there. No limit.
All right, and I will also put this to the panel. There was a question, and if someone has an opinion or thought on this on the panel, how can we stop firearm sales to felons, mentally ill, domestic abusers, and terrorists, and across state lines? That's a mouthful. Does anyone on the panel have an opinion or thought on that?
Should we take them one at a time?
Sure.
I can just say that this is something that we worked on is just a general background checks. and that's really where it is. That's where we're standing on it right now.
So federal legislation.
Criminals are going to submit to a background check.
Okay, well, I think there's a question in here that addresses that, so, let's see. Here it is, and maybe this was your question. If criminals don't get background checks, how will requiring background checks affect criminals? And I think that was your question.
It's everybody's question. The criminals can hide from the other. Yeah, that's everybody's question.
I'm just going to say a little point about it. We have laws so that we live in a society with other people. We have laws about, not so long ago, you had laws where you could just drive your car without insurance, and now you have to have insurance. And you're right, there are people who drive without insurance, and that is illegal. But the amount of people who have insurance now on their cars has dramatically gone up, and we are all safer because of that. So that is the idea behind background checks, is that we can, if you can, let me speak, please. Let me speak, please.
And excuse me, I just want to interject here in that our panelists here are volunteering their time. They can only give you their perspective and their point of view, And if we get into a debate, we are going to be here till midnight, and as moderator, I have to honor everyone's time here, so I respect your right to disagree with the panelist, but that's the question, and she's answering it. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as far as background checks, what it is, you simply want to frustrate the criminals. And if you can make it one more step that they have to do, then that is one more thing that you've done to keep at least a few more guns out of their hands.
So, on the question, so here in Illinois, and you can, I mean, anything, you can look up numbers. You can Google it all, you can get your numbers from tons of different places. Straw purchasing in Illinois is a pretty horrendous problem. So just straw purchasing is when, so I can go in, right, because I have clean records, extremely clean. So I can go in and buy legally. And so then I can go and sell to my buddy who cannot buy legally. He's the criminal who cannot do a background check under any, he just can't, right? He'll go running. So what happens here is that for private sales, we don't require a background check. Oh, it's not true?
That's not true.
Okay, so.
You work for the ICHP?
I do.
Okay.
Well, here, everyone should have to do a background check for any sale, regardless. They should have to, right?
You should go to jail.
And straw.
Nobody's enforcing. Oh, no, absolutely.
And I won't disagree with that. The enforcement on sales that are being done between me, the good guy, and the not so good guy needs to be enforced. It needs to be discussed. What should we do to fix this problem? Because it's a huge problem here in Illinois, huge. So criminals are not going to do the background checks, right? We know this, but they are still getting the guns, and we know that those guns are not just falling off of trees; they're coming from stores. So somewhere in this pipeline, we need to find where the problem is, and we need to fix it.
And thank you, John. And I'm going to follow up with a question from someone in the audience who says, I am 17 and attend high school and feel in current times that having an armed and trained security personnel in the building would make me and my colleagues feel safer. Do you have an opinion on that or any experience in that realm, John? At the schools?
Just the schools I've been in, police officers, usually at least two, usually more than two. And there are some schools in Chicago that don't have police officers in the building, but a lot of them do. Does it make the environment safer? I mean, it's a police officer. I'm assuming it does, you know? And for schools that don't have that, you know, if it's something that needs to be discussed in the community, then for that student, I would say, usually what I would say to my students, if you have an issue, you have a problem, go to your administration and go to the teacher you trust and bring that up in discussion. You know, everything should be discussed and debated. And then the people or the debate will lead to a conclusion that hopefully works for everyone.
Chris, I'm going to go back to you. There were two questions, and I'm going to sort of combine the sentiment. They were referring to, and maybe you can clarify the part of your presentation that was talking about the Lori Dan case and the mass shooting victims and so forth. I think you were articulating that those specific instances were set forth in Highland Park's ordinance, correct?
Yes.
I mean, the question is phrased, do you really think a crazy person like Lori Dan or a criminal will unload their 30-round clip and only use a 10-round clip during the shooting or robbery? And my understanding of what you were saying was that those were just instances that provided the basis for Highland Park entering its ordinance. Is that correct? I mean, but I'm not, I sound like I'm cross-examining you, don't I? I'm sorry.
Objection. There were 4 mass shooting incidents that were described in the beginning of the ordinance as the basis. Another that came out later is something they had been concerned about was the Lori Dan incident. So those were some of the legislative history of how they came to adopt this ordinance. I guess the question of whether or not I think that, the people who were involved in these mass shooting incidents all appear to be horribly mentally ill and for some reason want to kill a lot of people. But in my opinion, would it make a difference? Yes. If you think having a magazine that only holds 10 rounds and one that can hold 100, I think that does give the victims in a tragedy at least an ability to get away or tackle the shooter. So, yes.
Can I answer that?
Thank you.
Because one of those questions was mine. And the point I wanted to make about the mass shootings, they were all done in something that we call no-gun zones, meaning that even people that are concealed carry holders can't go in there. If they're law-abiding citizens, they're not going to bring a firearm in a theater if it's a no-gun zone. And they go in there because they know they can't be stopped for a long time. You know, it takes a good guy with a gun to kill a bad guy with a gun or stop him. And if the concealed carry if people were there that were concealed carry, and we've seen this happen already, they would not let that guy finish that magazine.
And I hear what you're saying, and you know, I would, if you Google the Friedman versus Highland Park case, you can actually read Chris's brief and the court's opinion on why they affirmed their right to have the ordinance. Do you want to say anything in response to that comment?
Well, I'm talking about just that, those examples is what I was talking about.
I see. Well, thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate
That
it.
was also my duplicate question.
Okay.
But I've noticed, I went to see 2 movies, one in January, one in February, 2 movie theaters owned by the same chain that was involved with the shooting out in Colorado. In January and February, these 2 theaters had no guns allowed signs up. The federal court in Colorado ruled that since the only theater in town that had a no gun sign up was where the shooting happened, that theater was liable for the shooting. And so the theaters, and I talk about Stratford Square and the one in Deer Park, in the same chain, they had no signs up in January and February. After that court ruling came down, the no gun signs disappeared from those theaters. So they're recognizing that the people are safer when concealed carry people come in. And I think, sir, if...
I'm not going to argue with you, except the lawyer in me just wants to say, or they're trying to avoid liability. But again, I'm going to have to, excuse me, I'm going to have to exercise my moderator prerogative, because otherwise I'm going to have the rest of the audience angry that we're staying too late. I do want to get to another question, which was, what might be some effective tips to advocate for banning assault weapons and handguns in our community? So someone from the other side of the issue, I'm putting that question out there to the panel. Would anyone like to address that question?
I'll just say where I began the presentation about the Highland Park case, there was a window to pass legislation ordinances, and it expired in July of 2013. So it's really a moot point now, unless the state wants to revisit that. But only a handful of municipalities adopted assault weapons bans.
Thank you, Chris.
Senator Morrison's bill.
Oh, well, there is do you want to speak about Senator Morrison's bill?
There are efforts.
Senator Morrison is proposing legislation that would reopen the issue of, well, it would actually, if passed, give those communities that were barred by the appellate court's decision the opportunity to put an ordinance on the books, correct? Is that
I think so.
Yeah. Because, for instance, the city of Lake Forest declined to pass an assault weapons ban because they didn't have enough time, and they were concerned about the repercussions, and And so they felt that at that time, they were not going to put anything on the books. And so by virtue of the appellate court's decision, they lost the opportunity to put that on the books because they declined to do anything at all. And so this, in light of this recent decision, Julie Morrison is proposing legislation, and forgive me if I'm misinterpreting it, but my understanding of it, having not read the bill, is that it would open the door so that municipalities can revisit this question and get that right back to decide to have a ban or not have a ban. Bob, should drones be considered protected by the Second Amendment? Or Chris?
I don't, unless they're armed, probably wouldn't be a Second Amendment question, but they probably are not. If someone wants to ban armed drones, I think they would not violate the Second Amendment to ban that.
I'd like to ask those on the panel who feel they have the ability to answer this question. How can our mental health industry better identify and provide treatment for mentally ill persons who might otherwise resort to suicide and homicide? Laura, do you have any insight on that in light of your organization's work?
Yeah, I just want to say, there are some laws that have been passed, and California has one that basically allows, and I'm generalizing because I'm a teacher and not an instructor, but it generally basically says that if you have somebody in your family who you feel is a threat, that you can go to the police and you can tell them what your concerns are, what their diagnosis is, what it is that they've told you, and that they can do something. I do know through NAMI, which is a mentally ill organization nationally and here in Illinois, I do know through them that that is one of the problems when you do have someone who is mentally ill in your family, that you feel that they are at risk of hurting themselves or hurting someone else, that it is very hard to get the police to be able to intervene. And it's not that the police don't want to, it's that the mentally ill do have rights, and the question becomes their rights or the safety, their own safety and other safety. So, but I know California did pass a law after what happened last year in no, I'm forgetting which suburb that Richard Martinez's son was killed in. So, but that's basically what I know about that.
But there is a law in Illinois that allows you to go to court and ask for a family member to be committed against their will. And that is
not immediate, and that's the problem.
Being immediate is a violation of due process. You can't take someone's property without jury trial.
And I think the panelist is saying that I think you're right and she's right in that their position is based on their concern that people they will get hold of them, and the process in Illinois, you do have to they do have a right to due process, so that's true too. Can I move on to another question? The U.S. government does not collect data on gunshot fatalities nationally. That's asserted by the questioner. Data is vital to find a solution. What can be done to make the U.S. government collect gun fatality data nationally as it is done for auto fatalities? Is there a response to that, Bob?
The FBI publishes something every year called Uniform Crime Reports, and last week I was reading a page on national gun fatalities. So maybe the questioner is familiar with that document.
I think I may be able to address that a little bit. The CDC in Atlanta does have an injury control program, and they recently have been collecting statistics on gun injuries. And as I recall, the last statistics of a complete year was 2013. And the 2013 statistics showed that there were actually by a few hundred more fatalities by guns than there were vehicle crashes.
That includes suicide data, I've seen the same.
And the majority of those fatalities, a little over 50%, were in fact suicides. And those suicides were for people that obviously had guns in their families. So that is being collected now. Unfortunately, many years ago, Congress decided that the CDC should lose their funding for injury control for guns, gun information about gun injuries. And so it was only just recently that that was reestablished. And as I said, 2013 seemed to be the last time there were statistics. And what really was amazing to me is the first time that the fatalities for guns were greater than the fatalities for vehicle crashes.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that question. Did you have anything more to add to your answer, Bob?
Just that there's enough federal agencies out there to give you multiple sets of records on almost anything. That's what happened here.
And a little inside baseball, Steve is a physician with government background in medicine, and so probably that's the perspective you're coming from in terms of the CDC collecting data about gun fatalities. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you both.
I was just thinking we have time for maybe just one more.
One more, okay. And so I have to abide by the president's edicts here. So I will choose.
Can I give a quick update on concealed carry in Illinois? People might be interested in that. It's very quick. Not really.
I really would love to say yes, but I can't. And I am not the person with power here. The president is the person with power. So
say no, then we can speak.
that's because I'm a lawyer. So my last question that I'm going to ask that you have put forth, let's see. Okay, I think that, Chris, I'm going to give you the last question because I think some lay people in the audience may not understand. What constitutes a well-regulated militia? And what controls it, and how and when should a militia be used? Do you have any thoughts on that question?
No.
Or background from a legal perspective?
Well, I think that's really what the Heller decision considered and rejected, was that although there's a qualifying clause to the Second Amendment, and a lot of discussion about what was discussed at the Constitutional Convention about that, the debates over the Bill of Rights, nobody is really clear on what was intended by a militia. Nobody is really clear on what the founders intended or the framers intended, but it's no longer an issue because it's considered to be an individual right now. The Supreme Court has spoken, and it is not related to a militia. It's a right that every American has to keep and bear arms. In self-defense, we know that it involves handguns. The question of what other guns are encompassed by that right is really being determined by the courts and the legislatures now.
Mr. Wilson, I claim that question. Here's the reason I claim that question. We've seen a great assault on the freedoms of the people in this United States. The last 230 years.
All right. Sir, I'm sorry.
You guys disagree with, you shut them up. Why don't you listen once?
I listened to you actually clarify your question. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to actually, I have questions here that I think articulate what you said, and here's what I'm going to do. I think this is not, Robert Rules of Order do not apply because we are not a decision-making body. And I have volunteers here, and so, and you, I'm hearing what you say, what you're, yes, I hear you. And what I'm hearing is this, sir, that this is, you are very passionate, as are all the people in this room. Sir, please.
I'm gonna tell you about before.
All right.
I've run 7 questions, she didn't ask a single one.
All right, ladies and gentlemen,
You asked one, that was asked by somebody
and
else.
I've asked,
This is a very
actually, I
biased
asked more questions
Very
from
biased
the group than you did, than any other group, all right? And here's what I'm going to say. Excuse me, sir, please, all right? I have treated everyone here with respect, and I would like the same. So, what I'm going to say is this. This is an issue that everybody's passionate about, and we have heard passion on both sides. We have seen the stress that is created by holding in balance our Second Amendment rights and our right to be safe. And as Chris has pointed out, these issues are still being decided in the courts. I thank you all very much for attending and for participating, and please have a pleasant evening.
Thank you, Mr. Malaysia.